Welcome to the Brian Heap Creative Writing Podcast series. Dr. Brian Heap is the former head of the Philip Sherlock Center for the Creative Arts at the University of the West Indies, Mona campus in Jamaica. In June 2020, Dr. Heap was declared the Caribbean Regional winner of the 2020 Commonwealth Short Story Prize. This marked the beginning of a series of events, which has culminated in this new series of podcasts highlighting the creative writing of young people in Jamaica and the Caribbean. During the COVID-19 pandemic, students in Jamaica have faced several restrictions to their engagement with face-to-face creative activities. So, following his own success, Dr. Heap took the decision to donate a portion of the money from his Commonwealth Prize to support two competitions for students at the UWI Mona in which they could participate remotely. Two competitions were organized, one for short stories and another for short plays, and these were managed by Miss Debbie Ann Stern, the administrative officer at the Philip Sherlock Center for the Creative Arts. The services of three distinguished adjudicators were engaged, namely Dr. Jean Small, Ms. Carolyn Allen, and Mr. Michael Record, all of whom have previously had a strong professional and artistic connection with the center. It was then decided that 12 of the winning and highly commended stories and plays could be posted as podcasts for a wider audience to enjoy. The Chase Fund in Jamaica were approached and willingly lent their support to the project by providing funding for the recordings and post-production services. So, the whole project is the culmination of an inspiring collaboration between Dr. Heap, the Philip Sherlock Center, the Chase Fund, Andrew Campbell, audio engineer, sound designer, and Miss Nadia Roxburgh, technical manager, the panel of adjudicators, the readers, and of course, the student writers. What is, perhaps, the most striking aspect of the winning stories and plays is their enormous variety. Many of the works involve coming-of-age stories, as might be expected from a group of young writers. However, they also draw extensively on Caribbean history, psychology, folk traditions, and social issues for their inspiration, going so far as to experiment with language as well as speculative writing forms. This new series of podcasts, resulting from such an exemplary collaboration between a wide range of stakeholders, has contributed enormously in giving a much-needed voice to our creative young people of Jamaica and the Caribbean. We hope that you will enjoy each of these creative writing podcasts as we post them week by week.
Blighia Sapida, written by Janique Mcknight.
I remember reading a quote by Patrick Rothfuss in third form literature.
When we are children, we seldom think of the future. This leaves us free to enjoy ourselves as few adults can. The day we fret about the future is the day we leave our childhood behind.
It's not something I thought about deeply at the time, but it's pretty much a summary of life itself. Today is my birthday. Yay! I'm 25. I'm 25 and I'm not sure if I should be particularly glad. Whereas I'm thankful for the wisdom my former years have afforded me, I know from here on out, time will seem to move faster. Comparison really is a thief of joy. On days like these, you start to compare life to others who are at the same age or a little bit older. You start to compare accomplishments, and you begin to feel as if you've accomplished nothing. Even if you have, they seem to pale in comparison to others. When you're a child and you have all these bright dreams and ideas, the world seems limitless. As if you could make any dream a reality. But somewhere along the line, you realize things don't work that way. At least not for some of us. My struggle with social anxiety was well acknowledged by my friends in high school. Not that I look back, I was lucky to even have friends. I rarely spoke, but I was observant, and that made me a quick study and an excellent advisor. Initially, there were two of us, Jordan and myself. I knew Jordan from preparatory school. I still remember the day he first transferred there, well decked out in his khaki with his Desert Clarks and Jansport bag. Both his parents came out of an Audi, well dressed, obviously affluent, which was rare, but not so rare in these parts of Jamaica. His mother adjusted his collar, while his father removed his lunch bag from the car's rear seat. Jordan, from a young age, exuded an air of quiet confidence, and needless to say, he was a jovial child, showered with all the toys and attention any kid could want. I admit, I had a crush on Jordan when I first offered him one of my Shirley's biscuits during third grade recess, but eventually it faded into friendship, especially after I realized he likes the pretty girls like Addison. I never stood a chance. Addison joined our little clique in first form. She was one of the most beautiful girls I'd ever seen. She was a whole woman by second form, having been hit hard with the puberty hammer. Her body was well carved, like an hourglass, and her breasts were full, just as much as her more posterior assets. Not to mention, she was a brownie, and in Jamaica, riddled with discrimination. That went a long way. All the young pubescent boys wanted to have their way with her. Addison was always book smart, always in the top 5 of the class. And when Jordan suggested we add her to our integrated science group for a project, I was not about to object. From then on, she'd stuck to us like butter on bread. Michael and Christopher, who we all refer to as Chris, joined the clique a bit later. We met them on the bus traveling home from the school's annual barbecue in third form. Yeah. They were always closer to each other than they were to the rest of us, but we had a lot of fun together. The following Monday, we met Candice, who was sitting nearby our regular lunch spot reading a Bible. I asked her what she was reading about, and she started to rant about God and sin and hellfire. I wasn't a religious person myself, but I respected that she had her beliefs and I had mine. Everyone needs a belief system to cope with life, and whatever the system, I have no right to judge. Candice was the last addition to our 6-member gang. Every day after, we ate lunch together, ritually at the back of the school auditorium under the ackee tree. Blighia Sapida was the scientific name for it. Something I had learned in science class and never forgot. The ackee was always interesting to me, with its bright red covering, choosing only to open when it was ripe and ready. My mouth would water at the thought of my mother cooking it with saltfish and dumplings. But, though beautiful, I learned the ackee could also be deadly. I remember one day, Jordan had picked up an unopened ackee that had fallen into the dirt and forced it open. "That can't eat, brother," Michael stated. "My uncle got sick last year cause him forced open some ackee, you know." "I saw him did hungry," Addison joked. "Him dead, you know?" Michael responded. "Nothing force ripe, never good," I said, remembering something my mother once said to me. Looking back, that statement had a much deeper meaning than I could fathom at the time. In Jamaica, meeting up with friends is not an option if you don't live nearby, with the majority having strict parents, or parents trying to be strict, and the high crime rate. We had our WhatsApp group chat in which we would talk about mostly things that, looking back, were naive and insignificant. We all watched Disney shows and cartoons with superheroes and fairies, where no one could die, no one would get hurt, and everything always worked itself out in the end. Not to mention the romance, beautiful, simple, and innocent. We were all going to be doctors and lawyers, billionaires who fell in love and got married by 20 with a big house, a nice car, and pretty kids. And we were going to be friends forever. By fifth form, we were very much aware of the dirtier parts of life and romance. And Michael had admitted to having a particularly awkward encounter with his female neighbor, which robbed them both of their chastity. Soon followed by Jordan, who must have been with at least 5 girls from the class. Candice viewed such activity as a sin if done before marriage. And Addison never spoke of her views. In fact, she usually stayed quiet during these conversations. Seventh form was when peculiar things began to happen. It seemed as if life had suddenly extended a spiny hand and slapped us all in our unsullied faces. I guess we had all had our secrets, but all the things we had struggled to keep in the dark slithered out like snakes into the light. Jordan and Addison were now dating and had sloughed off from the group, always seeming to sneak away for some secret rendezvous. Candice had just lost her father to cancer and was suddenly all quiet all the time, skipping school often, which I later found out was to hang out with Mr. Dixon, the PE teacher. I didn't even need a psychologist to tell me that she was filling the gap her father had left behind with this 30-year-old man who was abusing her fragile mental state. But what was I to do? Report it? Ruin Candace's reputation and put my family at risk when angry Mr. Dixon decides to take revenge after losing his job? So I kept my mouth shut. The weirdest occurrence was Michael and Christopher's frequent partying with every chance they got. They were always together, so it wasn't surprising that they wanted to party together as well. But the weird part was that after every party, they would sleep at Michael's house. He, like most Jamaican children, were raised in a matriarchal household, and mothers aren't usually very strict, especially with their sons. So he got away with all the things I couldn't. Since I was lonely and couldn't third wheel Jordan and Addison, plus Candice was one of those girls with a strict Christian mother, I decided to lie, regrettably, to my parents one night, and ventured out with Michael and Christopher to a night, after which I joined the sleepover at Michael's house. The gentleman gave me the bed and agreed to sleep on the floor. Thanks to my 17-year-old empty stomach churning away at Solly Boom and Appleton, I awoke in the middle of the night to soft whispers and low grumbling. At first I was confused. I figured the guys were up talking and didn't want to wake me, so I peeked over the side of the bed, opening my mouth to alert them of my presence, but what I saw was ghastly. Things started to make sense then. But facts like this hit different when you see it up close and personal. Our eyes made 6, and still in shock, I just sat there staring at these brawny masculine figures participating in this act of love? Whatever it was, it could get them brutally murdered by ignorant gang members and shunned by the majority. My shocked exclamation sliced through the awkward silence. Oh, and it Was I still high from the weed I had tried for the first time? Setting my shock aside, that night we stayed up past 6 a.m. having a heartfelt discussion about sexuality. It was very obvious Chris was facing a deep internal struggle with his sexual orientation. Michael told me of the occurrence that caused Chris to realize he was gay. A simple case, but a case that had led him to attempt to write himself out of the script with a skipping rope just last year. A failed attempt, of course. I imagine the shame he must have felt, having grown up being taught to love only women in this way, constipated with these sinful urges to make love to someone like himself, someone with a penis. Homosexuality does occur in nature even in other species. So is it really so unnatural? I doubt he woke up one day and smiled to himself, deciding he preferred the back door to the front. I myself have entertained fantasies of being with women. Why should we have to associate shame with our curiosities and urges? I accepted Chris and Michael wholeheartedly, lest God himself come from heaven to tell me otherwise. Since then, I hadn't hung out with anyone from the gang in about 2 weeks. The weeks of the final Cape examination. Then one day I got a call from Addison. I heard sniffling. She was crying. She took a deep breath and asked me if I was free to talk. Of course I was free. I basically had no life. All my friends somehow drifted into a mature adult world with all these secrets I was not privy to, so of course I was available. I'm pregnant, she said, almost jokingly. And I could hear the thick lump in her throat. Suddenly my mind went blank. I didn't want to frighten her any more than she already was, so I calmly, as calm as I possibly could, asked, "So, what a plan, Addie?" She told me she wanted to get an abortion. Mind you, this is illegal in this country. I asked if she had told Jordan, and her reply was most shocking. It's not Jordan's baby. I'm not usually one to ask questions, but at this point, my mind was blown. How did we all get here? Addison's family was from what we would call the ghetto. Even if we could find a doctor willing to perform the procedure, where would we get the money to pay him? Who is the father, Addie? He better find the money, cause there is no way we get that much before it's too far along. My stepfather, she said after about 10 minutes of raw, painful silence. He comes. He comes into my room at night when my mother is asleep. She broke down crying over the phone. Her voice shaking as she explained how her mother was aware of the situation. I could almost taste her tears through the phone, and I couldn't help it when my own eyes began to well up. Who have I become? Supporting gays. Something I was told was wrong. And murdering babies. Staying silent about child molesters. Is this what adulting means? In that same week, I skipped school and accompanied her with money from her cherished rapist to fulfill her wishes. I don't know what was going on inside Addison's head, but if there was any remorse, she was careful not to show it on her face. I know she was strong. For a teenager, at least. Her spirit never broke. She didn't let the trauma show. And she had hidden this gracefully for years. In silent anguish as her rapist went unpunished, unfazed, unbothered. I had never wished death upon anyone. But for what this man did to Addison, I would strike him down, smiling, swiftly, and with great indifference. I myself was not untouched by Sergeant Trauma because during that long summer, I got into an entanglement, unexpectedly, foolishly. Joshua was a scammer, but he was poor, and on this island, men do what they have to.
I didn't support it. But who was I to tell him to stop when there were so few job opportunities? He did try to find a job, but that doesn't usually work out well for people without degrees. Joshua was never very book smart, but he was smart in every other way. I think I was mostly bored, and Joshua was a fun distraction until feelings came into play. One day after we had stopped by KFC to get some food, Joshua went to use the bathroom and left his phone on the table. It rang, and Mommy was the name shown on the screen. I had met his mother a few times before, so I answered. But to my surprise, the voice was no other than Candice. This girl, she really got around. Upset and hurt by this act of betrayal, I left without saying a word. Ironically, it was raining that day. All the better. I had an excuse for my tear-stained face. I felt as if I couldn't breathe. I couldn't eat. I felt sick to my stomach, as if I was trying to regurgitate all the memories, all the time we had spent together. Every time my phone made a sound, my heart raced, hoping it was him, yet hoping it wasn't him. I didn't want to admit it, but I was being consumed by my emotions for him. Finding out about such an act of betrayal so unexpectedly, it changes your view of the world. How are you then to believe that anyone out there is different from the masses? Our love was addictive, fleeting. But what did I lack? I may not be the most beautiful, but we had something. I felt a connection, and it wasn't one-sided. It's a pity men are raised this way, to hustle and hide their emotions and drown themselves in lust and addiction and pride, toxic masculinity, while women are taught the complete opposite. I had no time to dwell on those feelings, with school reopening soon. I had applied to medical school and got accepted on a full scholarship that year, which had drastically lifted my spirits. Michael went on to study law, while Chris embarked on the path to becoming a writer. Addison was also accepted into nursing, but her grades had suffered because of the trauma of the abortion. So she did not receive a scholarship, and her parents could not afford to pay her tuition. So she, at first, worked at a call center, but somewhere along the thin line of what was left of hope in Addison's life, she decided that using her body to make money was the better way. She was robbed of her chastity, her innocence. She did not offer it. She did not agree for it to be taken from her. As females, at first we dream of meeting the perfect man, winning his heart, having him look upon us as something special, as if we weren't special without their validation. And then we seek to give them pleasure. We want to use our bodies, often at the expense of our comfort. We hope to have a choice in who we offer ourselves to. This is the mentality we derive from that lit up box-shaped appliance on our dressers or walls. That is what movies fed our minds. Often, life doesn't play out that way, or even if it does, we are betrayed by this person we once hoped we would spend the rest of our lives with. This rewiring breaks us. Because what then? Were we not special? Were we not the princess in the story? Is the value we once placed on our bodies invalid? Addison felt like dirty laundry. She was dirty laundry placed in a washer full of lusting men. Laundry desperately wanting to be cleansed, to be seen, valued, and appreciated. Candice was no different. Still intent on using all physical means to drown her traumas, sometimes trying to subtly worm her way back into our lives like a parasite, trying to drag the rest of us down with her. But all Candice was ever known for after all that was sleeping around, and we were wiser than to think she was the same person as back then. I felt guilty for not trying to support Candice more after her father had died, but ultimately her decisions were her own, and we all had our own issues to deal with. We're not responsible for what happens during our childhood, but we are most certainly responsible for dealing with the traumas it may have caused. It shouldn't be used as an excuse for becoming a green-eyed vindictive zombie. Candice was also caught in the act with Jordan's father, and so she became the main cause of his parents' long-time coming divorce. Jordan would never forgive her for this. But it wouldn't matter anyway, because he moved to New Jersey with his mother a few months after graduation. Jordan became a social media influencer. He always had a hulk of a personality, and the saying is true. The rich really do only get richer, so he was a millionaire by 20. He never spoke to the rest of us as much as in the past, but he called me occasionally. Jordan invited me to his Los Angeles penthouse in the summer, since I only just graduated and having never traveled, plus with him paying the full expense of the trip, how could I refuse? Okay. I went there and saw him casually chilling with Will and Jaden Smith on his front porch. I couldn't believe my eyes. I grew up with this person. We shared the same air and ate the same food, lived in the same country, and look. I had to admit, I was a bit jealous of Jordan's success. Being able to get just about anything he wanted, maybe even anyone. But just as I was beginning to be convinced by this facade, Jordan, while we were conversing on the night of my arrival, told me he had never felt so lonely in his entire life. His requesting my presence then made sense. Since Jordan became famous, all his relationships were business arrangements or fake friends seeking to take advantage of him. He wasn't close to his family, and a genuine woman was hard to find. Jordan wanted me to marry him. For him, I was his last chance at happiness. Now, I wasn't fully against this, but I hadn't dated anyone since Joshua, and I didn't really plan to. All men seemed to do was master dishonesty and unfaithfulness anyway. I told him that time had definitely changed us, and we should get to re-know each other, which we're in the process of doing until, after 2 weeks, I found out Jordan had an addiction to cocaine, among other CNS stimulant drugs. This was stressful for me, but I should have known no one was that active and happy all the time. I convinced him to go to rehab and return to Jamaica to finish my studies. He was out of rehab by the end of that year, and before I could return the next summer, Jordan had overdosed in a random 5-star hotel in Paris. I was struck by grief and guilt. So much guilt. Could I have done more to help him? Should I have married him? I have to move on, right? I can't dwell on this. Not again. Not life coming at me again. I'll never hear his laugh nor see his smile again. I will never be graced by his presence. Who will I call when I feel that the world is on my shoulders? What was it for? Was his existence so insignificant? I always admired people who were brave enough to open their hearts to loving someone else, trusting them to protect their emotions, their reputation, their health, and sanity. I was never so brave in that sense. And after Jordan's death, I had given up on any kind of healthy love life. I had always seen love and romance as the main purpose of this story we call life. What is the point of it all? What is the point of all the riches and the accomplishments and the struggle if at the end of the day there is no one to share it with? I'm all for self-love, but I cannot hug myself when I'm sad. I cannot offer myself a different perspective on life all the time, nor can I touch myself the way I dream of being touched. I sat beneath the ackee tree pondering these things, waiting for the casket to pass by so this horrible day could end. I saw some wangaguts waiting for the part with the food, and smokers idling nearby in their washed-out suits, inhaling cancer from the cheap roll-up sticks between their fingers, and catcalling at women with voluptuous assets as they scampered by. I began to ponder the meaning of life once more. My thought process was halted upon seeing Candace trying to greet Addison, who was leaving the church. I wanted to drag Candace into the street for the trucks to crush her, but I decided to ignore her presence. Michael and Chris were lagging behind Addison. "Why you never in the church?" Chris asked, patting down a spot to sit in the patch of grass adjacent to me. "The pastor only in there trying to scare people with hell," I answered. But the truth was I just couldn't bear the stifling aura of sadness inside that room. The pallbearers walked by, struggling with the casket, and I entertained the thought of them dropping it to let Jordan's body roll down the hillside. Addison made a sniffling sound, capturing our attention. On closer inspection, we saw that she was laughing, and Michael's eyes widened. "Look at Jordan too, both him dead. Me a strip, Michael and Chris a Batman. This here love fanatic can't fight a man." She touched my shoulder and started laughing again. And look at Candice over there, crying like she even know Jordan anymore, after she ruined him family. We looked at Candice, who was walking down the rocky path to the graveside in ridiculously high heels with a napkin to her face. She began to stumble and slipped, her legs wobbling like jelly as she quickly held onto the trunk of a tree. We began to laugh uncontrollably. Life was a joke, you know? Life was a joke. Putting everything into perspective, comparing where we started to where we ended up, Addison was right to laugh. Like arrows of the ackee, we were all together once upon a time. Till that red, leathery protective covering, as bright as our hopes and dreams, burst open to reveal the bright, scorching rays of the sun. One fell out, one was rotting, but maybe we were never even in the same pod at all, because some of us, perhaps all of us, were forced to emerge from that husky defense, premature, mutating to become something toxic, poisonous, yet free. I felt a burden rise from my chest as I absorbed my friend's exuberant expressions. Fairy tales might not come true, but reality is so much more interesting than happily ever after.